Hi, baby boomer fans. We are Jackie and Janine, the Pfeiffer sisters, and love to talk about the 1950s, inviting you to reminisce with us as we explore experiences of that decade.
We chronicled the distinct memories of our childhood in our book, While the Windmill Watched, a slice of rural America in the 1950s, which takes you on a notably historic journey through that often forgotten decade. We also want to hear about your experiences during the 1950s. We will feature guests whose special stories of that decade will bring to mind magical moments of reflection, some with tears, some with smiles, but above all, a good dose of laughter.
We would like you to chat with us as we bring to mind the sights and sounds so familiar to that time in history. Grab your favorite malt or Green River. Make sure you are wide awake and get ready to be inspired about the 1950s. Welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat. Hello, we are so glad that you have joined us on this, our wonderful broadcast in every week that we do have with beautiful guests from throughout the United States who have lived in the 1950s or have been influenced by someone who lived during the 1950s. I think you'll really enjoy our guest today because he brings another little bent to life in the 1950s. Before we introduce our guest, though, I would like to make mention of the red subscribe button in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. That, if you would please be so kind as to click that button, as well as the thumbs up button, which tells us that you like this conversation and you like this broadcast. We would be very grateful for you to do that. Jackie.
And while you're perusing the screen, take note of the banner below, as well as the beautiful sunset on the book called While the Windmill Watched, a slice of rural America in the 1950s. We are going to introduce our guest now, and we're really glad to have him with us. His name is Ray Welk. Ray was born in Rugby, North Dakota in 1957. He was the youngest of 5 sons to Anton and Frances Rosart Welk. His parents moved to rural McHenry, North Dakota in the fall of 1958. The family raised small grains and had cattle until 1967, and then they changed to raising hogs, at times raising up to 300 on the farm. So welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat, Ray.
Hi, hello.
Good morning, Ray. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Yes. Yeah, it's good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
You're
welcome.
Instead of asking questions chronologically, in other words, from your birth in 1975 until today, I'd like to begin in 1978 and move backward. In the information you supplied, you stated that you moved to the Granite Falls, Lake Stevens area of Washington in 1978. And for those who aren't familiar, this is Western Washington, north of Seattle. So how did this move come to be?
Well, I have an older brother that moved out here 10 years prior to that. He's 15 years older than me. And he came out in the very end of 1967 and worked out here and encouraged me to come out and I did. I come out and visited and gosh, it was just a few months later. I decided I'd come out here and see if I could find work and I did and have been here ever since. I came in February of 1978.
And what were you engaged in?
I'm sorry, say that.
What work did you find? What job did you find?
Oh gosh, the first job I had, I worked for 9 years in a steel foundry. Very different than being on the farm in North Dakota. It's heavy industry. They're actually melting and pouring steel. I did that for 9 years, and then I hired on to Boeing, and built airplane interiors for a little over 30 years, and just retired in June of last year. So, and I tell you, retirement is a good gig.
So
Okay.
would you tell us, please, how did being raised on a farm aid you in any job you've had since leaving North Dakota?
Oh, I suppose the work ethic is a big thing. Um, and you know, most people that grew up on a farm, it's like you have to fix everything.
Yes.
You know, one day you might be a mechanic working on a tractor or some piece of farm equipment. The next day you're a carpenter doing, you know, pens in the barn or electrical, or who knows, you know, just a little bit of everything. And I often got that when I was at work. People would say, "Well, how did you figure out how to do that?"
Mhm.
And I will say there were a number of people that I worked with that were from North Dakota. Um, you know,
Interesting.
baby boomers, and you know, individuals that were raised on the farm. And I'm telling you, they stood out. Their work ethic and their ability to think on their feet on the go, and make good decisions, and assess the situation, and see what needs to be done. Um, yeah, one of the best products North Dakota had was their kids that moved off the
Yes.
farm.
They're exports,
Yeah,
unfortunately, for North Dakota sometimes.
yes.
Okay. So we're going to go a different way now. Because of your last name being the same as a famous North Dakotan, folks will be curious to know if you're related to Lawrence Welk. So give us a little hint about that, please.
Um, yeah, and I honestly, I guess I never was much of a fan, but I have it here in front of me, so I will just read from it. In 1781, a man named Moritz Welk was born, or a child, I guess, born in 1781, and he actually had six children, but two of his sons, Casper was the father, the lineage to Lawrence Welk, and John was the lineage to my father, Anton Welk. And Anton and Lawrence were of the same generation. They were 6 years apart, um, with Lawrence being the older. So the way it works out is Lawrence Welk and my father, Anton Welk, were third cousins. Um, I'm not sure exactly what that makes me, but Moritz Welk would have been a great grandfather to Lawrence Welk and my father. That's the connection.
All right.
Ray, Ray, do you have any musical talents and abilities as did Lawrence?
No, to be honest with you, when I was in the seventh grade, our chorus teacher told me, now here's building confidence. He told me, your time would be better spent in study hall.
Oh,
Honest to God.
And did you believe her or not?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I really don't have any musical abilities. I can't read music. I don't know. My wife says I can sing, but I question that myself.
Oh, well, that's wonderful when she's complimentary of you.
Okay, yes.
Any other
Okay.
questions come to mind, Janine?
No, not right now.
Okay. All right. Well, then I'll go on and ask the next one. So tell us about your hometown of McHenry, North Dakota, and why has it been listed on the National Register of Historic Places since 1986?
McHenry has the only existing railroad loop on the North American continent. That's where the train actually comes into town from the east, and and goes through town, and actually goes out into this open field and makes a circle, a loop, and returns on the same track that it came in on. There was a side track there, and they would usually, if there were boxcars with them, they would put the train on the side track, and they would take the engine and the caboose and go around the loop and change ends, obviously, with the engine and the caboose, and then head on back the way they came. But 1981, I believe, was the last train in town, and the track was abandoned then after that. But they did save the loop, and it is on the National Register of Historic Places.
What railroad line was that, Ray?
Gosh, I think it was Great Northern or Northern Pacific. I'm not even sure myself. I know it's on Wikipedia.
Okay.
You can look.
It is,
you
and
can look it up in
Wikipedia says it's the Northern Pacific Railway.
Okay. Yes.
I think it's interesting that the Northern Pacific Railway had a loop up that far north in North Dakota. Jackie and I, growing up near Minokan and Bismarck, are very familiar with the Northern Pacific Railroad line that goes east and west through the state, and to have a loop up to McHenry, it was very interesting to me.
And
Yeah,
do you suppose it was up? Oh, go ahead.
It started in Valley City, and
Okay.
kind of went northwest. And there were tracks in Glenfield, which is just like 8 miles south, and that one still runs, is a bit of a main line, still runs trains. And then it was a few miles north, there was another track, so it was kind of just this little spur to get all these little towns. The train still runs to Benford, which is like 8 miles east of there, but they actually then just backtrack. They don't come up and make the loop anymore.
Oh, okay. All right. And is that just a freight train then? Not a passenger train?
Correct. Yeah. It's just a freight train. I can remember when I was a little boy, there was a depot in town, and you could ride the train there. A lot of people would go from there to Valley City and make the connection and on to Fargo.
Sure.
On the passenger train.
Sure.
So why
Who
do you
knows?
suppose it was there? Was the freight, was it grain or oil or coal or what?
Mostly grain. I mean, there was an elevator in town, PV elevator, and at one time there was a John Deere dealer in town, so I would assume machinery and tractors that he sold at the dealership would come in on the train, and there was also a lumber yard. So
sure. What would have been the alternative if there wouldn't have been a loop to turn around? What would the railroad have done to provide access to a return trip to Valley City?
There are several, I believe, in the state. There's turntables where they actually put the engine on a turntable and turn it around. There are, I don't know about in North Dakota, but there are Y situations where the train can come in and it makes a Y, and they actually turn the engine around that way.
Interesting.
But the loop, I can remember seeing it, and it was on the west side of town, and Alfred Anderson ran his cattle out there, and the guys at the train would have to get out and open the gate. And,
interesting. Fun.
The train would go through, and they'd have to close the gate so the cows wouldn't get out while they were going around the loop and then open it again and pass through on the return. So
Fun.
something of interest that I will say is, I don't know what they're called, but you folks probably remember the little cars that the crew would work on the track. So they were little putt-putt cars.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
in 1975, we graduated. So in 2005, at our 30-year reunion, one of the guys that was a couple years younger than us has one of those little maintenance cars. And he brought it up, and we actually went around the loop on that
Oh,
thing, which was quite
fun.
enjoyable. Yeah.
Sure.
Bet. I bet.
In my reading about that, it was noted that this was more expensive. Building a loop was more expensive than building just a turntable, but yet they chose the more expensive of the two. And the question is still out there. No one seems to know why. Do you have any idea about that? And why would
I
it be
you
more?
know I don't know why.
Okay.
I believe originally they felt like the track would continue on west.
Uh,
So yeah, I don't have an answer for that one either.
well, neither did the writer of this article. I just thought maybe you had a clue.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
no, I don't.
All right.
Okay. On your farm background, Ray, fill us in on that. Did you like to be in the field planting crops? Were you a livestock person? What was your pleasure when you were on the farm?
I really enjoyed being out in the field on the tractor or the combine, whatever we were doing in the field. Gosh, I really looked forward to that. I couldn't wait to get home from school to go out on the farm. Um, I remember when my dad was milking cows, but he sold the cows when I was 10 years old and went on to raising hogs. I enjoyed that too, being around the animals. And we probably did it much different than it's done today. I mean, all our hogs were what today they call them pasture hogs. We raised them on dirt. It wasn't in a confined space.
Did you
Um,
did you farrow in the pasture then?
no, we did farrow in the barn, but we would usually pen them until they were the little pigs were weaned, and then they would have access um, to what was the loafing shed for the cattle, but the hogs were out there, and they would have access to outside.
Did you have morning chores and evening chores then before you went to school?
Oh yeah, I had to go out and help feeding all the pigs and water, and we did not have running water, so we were carrying water from the well to the barn and to the yard for the hogs.
That was pretty prominent back in the 50s to do that.
Yeah,
That running water
yeah,
wasn't accessible to many farm families.
yeah. And actually, ours went right up into the 70s. We were probably the last farm in the area that didn't have running water. When my parents retired in 73 and moved to town, that was actually the first house they ever had that had running water.
What was their temperament? What was the feel when all of a sudden they had running water?
Oh, I'm sure my mom was most appreciative of that, probably more so than my dad. I think about the work that my mom did. She raised 5 boys, that's a lot of diapers.
Yes.
With
Cloth diapers.
a wringer wash machine, and I had to carry water from the well to
Yes.
the house to wash clothes. And
And okay. And did she heat the water then in a copper boiler on top of the stove, or how was the water heated?
yeah, for small things, washing dishes, washing your face, whatever. We would heat the water in a tea kettle. But if we were going to take a bath on Saturday night, we had to fill the copper boiler, or when she was washing clothes, she would actually, she had a couple of them, and they would go on top of the wood stove, and
Sure.
one was for the wash water and one was for the rinse water. And yeah, that was.
Well, was there a hierarchy in, because there were 5 boys, who got to take the first bath, and then how did it go from there?
Oh yeah. Actually, I was very fortunate. I was the youngest, and that was it. Went in the pecking order. So
All
youngest went
right.
first. I always got clean bath water, and everybody else got second, third, and on and on. Yeah. So
Yes. It's interesting. Another guest that we've had on the show recalls the same memory of growing up in the 50s, and that Saturday night was bath night, and
mhm.
that's what you did. That's what you
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
Well, yeah,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. Okay, I can imagine that just the fact of having uh, the opportunity to avoid using an outhouse and to be able to have a septic system and indoor bathroom with running water and a flush toilet, that had to make your mom and dad feel like they were a king and queen, one would think.
Oh yeah. Um, um, especially in the winter time.
Oh, yes.
That was a cold place to be, going to the outhouse. When it's storming out, or 30 below zero. It's like, good grief.
Ray, did
So
you
Um,
was
did your excuse me, Ray, did your farm have electricity all of your life?
yes. My my parents said that the farm that they were on prior to McHenry, they got electricity in 1952. So I, I always remember having electricity. We didn't have running water, but we did have electricity.
and you had electricity in the house as well as in the barn?
Yes.
Mhm. Oh, what a wonderful change that made for rural America to have electricity. And it was interesting because a previous guest had said, even though we had electricity, it didn't mean that it was dependable, because until all the kinks got worked out electrically in rural America, we could have the lines and we could have the opportunities, but if there was a storm or if there was a situation that came about weather-wise, we didn't have electricity. It was very variable. Did you experience that also?
Yes, I can remember that as a boy growing up. And yeah, it probably did become less frequent as time went on. But yeah, I remember being, a couple days at times, or maybe even
Ah,
more
okay.
without power. Um,
Yes.
so yeah, and that of course changed everything, made things
Yes.
difficult.
Yes. Well, Ray, we have just a few minutes left, and in wrapping up our conversation, can you think of a, at the top of your head, a pleasant or a fun memory that just really resides in your mind from living in the 1950s?
Um, well, I guess I haven't talked about the school,
Mhm.
um, and I feel that I was fortunate in that I went to the same school all 12 years. Um, there and very small class. There were 13 that graduated in 1975, 12 of us started first grade together. And there were a few more, one person moved away, a couple were held back. The 13th person actually his family moved to town in the second grade. So we were all together, and just that close-knit community. In some ways, it's maybe too close, but everyone cared about everyone and took care. And it was, even though it was a rural community, looking back on it, it was like you had your family, and then the rural community was the family of choice in the community.
Yes.
Very tight. And I sure miss that. Being out here in the knot, as my wife calls it. And the wide open spaces.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because Jackie and I noted the closeness of community also of our Minokan community when we grew up in the 1950s. That was a wonderful aspect of especially being a child in that time, was that you knew your parents had your back, but the community did too. Right.
Well, and the other end of that too is like, you didn't get away with much because there's that Welk kid, he's doing this. And by the time you got home, Mom and Dad usually knew if you were creating trouble.
Ray, we want to thank you so much for being a part of our 1950s Fun Chat today. And I might mention to the viewers that how we made connection with each other. You have read our book, While the Windmill Watched, A Slice of Rural America in the 1950s, and you reached out to me, I believe it was in a Facebook message on our Facebook page, While the Windmill Watched, that you had read the book and you could make so many connections with what we had written in that book. And so the opportunity is open to our viewers as well. We don't be strangers. We love to hear your stories, and we would love to feature you as well out there on our Fun Chat. So Jackie, until then, let your mind wander to the swell time of poodle skirts, soda jerks, and cool cars.
And be sure to click on the red subscribe button and that thumbs up icon, and tell your friends, even your relatives, about the 1950s Fun Chat. Join us every week, Monday, 8 p.m. Central. But if you can't join us at that time, view our YouTube program found on the 1950s Fun Chat.
And just in case you want to learn more about Jackie and me, the Pfeiffer sisters, you can go to our website, whilethewindmillwatch.com. And it's a beautiful website that also gives you an opportunity to click on a button and order our book, While the Windmill Watched. It gives you an idea as well that where all of our 30 plus vendors are who are selling our book, and gives you also the opportunity to order directly through our national distributor, the NDSU bookstore. So remember, that is the website, whilethewindmillwatch.com. Remember, Christmas is upcoming. Consider giving our book as a gift to your friend or family, or even another copy to yourself. We've had fun today, and we hope that you have too. And we'll see you next time on the 1950s Fun Chat. Bye-bye.
We appreciate and thank each and every one of you, our viewers. Toodaloo.